And then before we get started, just remind everyone we have agreements. And this is in recognition that we co-create this safe space together for us to learn and experience ourselves deeply and grow. And so we're all part of making this work. So we ask that you speak from your own experience using I statements, that you treat other people the way you want to be treated, and that you just are here now. If you agree, do what Maxine and Myra and Joy and Morgan and Tammy or Haley have done and just type I agree into the chat. And with that, I'll turn the controls over to Ahmad. Welcome.
Kathy. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. I'm so excited to be here with you all for a lot of different reasons. One, it's always wonderful to do these webinars with Be Strong Families. Just the work that Be Strong Families is doing is just so incredible. So I'm really humbled to be here. And then, as many of you know, this was a webinar that we were going to do about 2 weeks ago, but unfortunately I was too ill to actually do it. I was in the hospital at the time. And so I'm really excited to be able to be here to share these thoughts with you all. And then lastly, just love is I guess a conversation that I'm incredibly passionate about, specifically because of the impact it's had on my healing journey. And so out of everything that we've already discussed, right, and we'll kind of discuss in the future, about equity, talking about social justice, talking about transformation, decolonization, talking about trauma work, it was really love and the work that I've done in that area that was the largest area of transformation that I've had in my life. And so really excited to share some of these thoughts with you all. And so before we get started, and we can go to the next slide, just wanted to highlight one thing. So we won't go through the ground rules because I know y'all already agreed to a few different rules and y'all basically captured everything. I just wanted to kind of put a disclaimer before getting started with the conversation about the sensitivity of this topic. Even though this isn't talking about trauma, right? It's not talking about different forms of violence and things like that, like we have in the past. But love is a really sensitive area. It's also a really heavily stigmatized area. And so for some people, love is seen as this incredibly beautiful thing. And for others, you may have, such as myself, been incredibly harmed by the concept of love, right? And so really wanted to just honor that. And then also at the same time, honor that within this session, we'll kind of be sharing different definitions that we each have, and then also sharing the definition that I kind of go with, that's from bell hooks, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a little bit. And so as you're going through this conversation, if you're finding that the definition that you have is not this necessarily the definition that you're aspiring to, that's okay, right? This is a space where we're really celebrating everything that we're bringing forward. And so if you need to take a step back, that's perfectly fine. Feel free to engage with the conversation, whatever ways that you want to. And also at the same time, right, as we define love, right, and as we come into what is love for each of us, we kind of risk starting to see some of our previous experiences that we may have viewed as love as things other than love, right? And that's absolutely normal. That definitely will happen. Really just honor whatever is coming up for you. This isn't saying that the love that you've experienced is not love. Even if it goes against the definition, it's really up to you to determine what it is for you, right? And what you want to own as loving actions and what you don't want to own as loving actions. And so you're in charge with all of that. Whatever anyone else is saying or bringing forward, that is your journey, and it's something that we're going to be honoring in this space. So to get started with the conversation, if we can go to the next slide, I would love to hear some of your thoughts about why you feel like love is important. And feel free to share instances in your life where it was important, or even more like theoretical things, right? Or values wise, just larger scale things of why do you feel like love is important for you? And as always, feel free to either, I think you can unmute and
Raise
kind
your
of.
hand or in the chat. And I was thinking about it, my first thought, and I kind of fill space until people start responding in the chat, but my first thought was that love is just the only thing that's important in some way to me. And I've always kind of accepted that as a ground, as like kind of the glue, that love is the glue is in the universe, the whole God being love, or love being God, that was what makes the world go round, or that's what, unites people. It's what resolves things. It's what helps with forgiveness and generates all the other spiritual and practical virtues. But Sherry says love can be life-changing. And Marcy says love is important to me because it's the way I grow and begin to love others. And Jessica says it helps you move lighter through life. It helps not be reactive. It helps you listen, be empathetic, help others and yourself be better. It slows down time. Sandra says love conquers all, to why this world is a mess today because love has waxed cold. And Tammy says, I agree, God equals love, agape love. And Gisela says, to me, everything with love is better than I guess without love. And that makes me think of cooking, like they say that's the secret ingredient when food is really nourishing and when it tastes good, is like the energy, the love that's put into it, makes us all better people, Morgan says.
Absolutely. That's wonderful. And I love that you brought like food into this, because in my head,
love leads me to good things, patience, understanding, sympathy, etc. So I think that's, love, a theme in here is that love brings out the best in us, or allows us to be able to experience the best of us, and in some way tame or quiet some of our other human attributes. So love has been corrupted, and Sherry says love has been corrupted and needs to be cleaned or renewed. Well, I think that's getting also to what you were talking about, Ahmad, about calling things love that don't feel loving, or that don't feel nourishing, or don't feel healthy, but they're given to you wrapped up and said, this is love. It's like, okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you all so much for all of those thoughts. That's brilliant. And from my experience, it's so rare to go into space and ask that question and not receive incredible positive feedback, right? I think on every level, right, of our existence, we just recognize that love is important. It's critical to everything that we are, everything that we do, all of our values, in so many different ways. And oftentimes, even if we can't necessarily name them, we still fully wholeheartedly believe that it does play a role. And so I guess a secondary question before we really get into what is love, how many of you on here have had the opportunity to actually take that step back and define love for yourself?
Jessica says she has. Mm-hmm. I have multiple times. Multiple times, and gone back to some basic texts, read about what other people said love is. Love is patient and kind, not jealous or boastful, not arrogant or rude. I mean, I've gone back to kind of biblical texts and spiritual texts about what love is. Are you asking if people have defined it for themselves?
Yeah, just or even like really thought about it, right? In terms of like, what are the values within love? What are the pillars?
We did that. It's interesting because we even did that as Be Strong Families. Like we have love as one of our values. I'm going to pull it. We have love as a value. Yeah. And we defined it for ourselves in a process. It's probably self-referential too, but I'll pull it up for a second.
So I do see that a few people have said that they have. That's absolutely wonderful. The reason that I ask is for myself and just from my experiences with working with individuals.
Ahmad, we're having trouble hearing you.
Oh.
Garbled.
Is this better?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll try to speak up. My throat is still not
Sorry.
100%, but I will raise my voice a little bit and let me know if it gets too low again. Um, so I see that in the chat that a few of you have said that you have, which is absolutely wonderful. And the reason that I asked that is because for myself, for a really long time, and just from a lot of the individuals that I work with in communities, oftentimes love is seen as that guiding force, as something so critical. And also at the same time, it's seen as something so universal that we don't ever really need to define it. And what that does at times, right, is if like right now we have 54 people on this call, right? If each of us defines it in different ways, what could happen, unfortunately, is that we could have contradictory definitions at different times when we don't have those conversations. And so oftentimes I'll work with families, right, or with a community where everyone wants to be loving, right? They want love to be kind of that central force that exists within that space that moves them forward and everything. But because they define it so differently, oftentimes it leaves everybody feeling as if they're very unloved and that there is no love within that space.
So that's when we defined it. That was why we defined it as a group, because we had all of our values, and then we thought something was missing, and people said, love, what about love? Like, we operate from love. And so then we asked the question, okay, what does it mean that we operate from love? How can we tell that we operate from love? Why do we operate from love? And what came out for us was empathy, kindness, patience are central to achieving well-being, healing, and peace, which are part of our mission statement. And that our value of love, starting with self-love, causes us to feel compassion and appreciation for everyone we encounter, and allows us to have heart-to-heart connections and hold space for transformation. So that's how we as Be Strong families thought about it. When I say we, it was really a collective, like board and staff, hashing out what is love for us, like when we're training or when we're offering things to the world. So.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
So Marcy says definitely over the years she's gained wisdom from her experience with others and how to love them by telling me what they need and want, and I can love each person a different way. That reminds me of the love languages, Marcy. We did a webinar on love languages and how people, what makes that it differs, what makes people feel loved, and that if you want someone to feel loved, you have to know what makes them feel loved in order to be able to achieve your goal. Sandra says love is unconditional. Beatrice says it's the machine that moves the world.
Beautiful. Great, awesome. So, and I see some of you are already kind of starting to kind of bring forward what you define as love. So if we can go to the next slide, I'd love to hear more of your thoughts on what is love for you, right? And as you define this, I actually want you to focus more on the values of love versus here's an exact definition of what it is, right? So what are the components or values that exist within your definition of love?
Jessica says, my values, I realize and respect that everything is borrowed, and because nothing is permanent, everything has its place and balance. You're better to still yourself and appreciate you and another's journey, whether you understand it or not. And for things that leave you unsettled, I practice Tong Len. This allows one not to walk away from what is ugly, messy, and painful, but gives you an opportunity to use your light to transform those things, leaving behind positivity.
Awesome. Wonderful. What else?
Well, I'm not sure about the difference between a value and a definition. So when I say something like kindness or patience, compassion or appreciation, acceptance, like, are those values or are those definitions?
So they could be both. The reason I highlight values is because so all of those could be values or they could be just the definition itself, but you could have a definition that doesn't include the values. So I could define love as like an action to somebody else, right? And things like that. But it doesn't really tell us about the values of that action, which is, again, why I'm asking for like more of the values versus just, because within certain definitions, right, you could remove
Yeah.
all the values.
Okay. So Lauren has something. She says she feels that if someone loves me, they continue to get to know me and who I am rather than expecting me to be the person they want me to be. They support me for me. If someone loves me, they treat me the way I want to be treated and listen and hear me.
Beautiful.
And Beatrice says love is everything. When you don't have it, you lose respect and empathy for everything. Gisela says, for me, love is the passion that drives me, the intense feeling that makes me do things for other people.
All of that is beautiful.
Love motivation.
So what was that? Sorry, go ahead.
I said it sounds like love as passion, love as motivation, love as respect, love as empathy.
Awesome.
I think love is acceptance. And for me, love, that patience is kind of similar to acceptance. It's like, and I think this is kind of where I'm hitting with Sandra on unconditional, which is if I love, I wait. You know what I mean? Like I wait through things, you know, I stay, you know, and that doesn't mean that in the moment, or even for, you know, could be even years, that there's much communication necessarily.
Yeah.
But I'm there. Like I think love is what keeps me showing up. So there's a certain loyalty that comes with love too.
That's beautiful. Yeah, and I think everyone is hitting on a lot of really amazing elements of love. So that unconditionality, different ways that you kind of define that, looking at love as something that's kind of action oriented, right? It's always kind of moving us forward. Y'all brought a lot of different things in terms of compassion and patience and loyalty and respect and all these really beautiful things that are a huge part of it.
Marcy says, I think love is encouraging me and being there through my highs and lows. People are thinking about how they feel loved, I think, you know, too. Like when somebody's encouraging me, when they're there through my highs and lows, when they're honest and transparent, when they're sharing God with each other and praying for each other. Love is accepting that person just how they are and not wanting to change them. I don't know. I mean, like with me, I love my son and I love him just as he is. And I also pray for him to get through some of the things that I think would make him healthier and happier. You know, I don't think it's always that. I mean, I guess there's like both, you know, like you're there and you're accepting what is. But at the same time, I feel like love is often for me holding the space for the most brilliant, beautiful, evolved form of that person to emerge. So, and believing that it's possible. So seeing beyond what is to what could be without forcing it, you know, without trying to, you know, make the person be that for me or for some, you know, but just knowing that we're all on journeys and like really seeing the beauty in the journey, but also the beauty about what that person's potential is, you know, in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's kind of often where we will get into kind of large debates, right, around that uh, of how do we do that in the healthiest of ways, right? And I love that you mentioned like without forcing it, right? Because people who believe that it is by forcing it, right? And that's where it becomes a very different conversation. But absolutely, seeing people within the realm of unlimited possibilities of everything they can be is so beautiful. Right? Like to me, that's a huge act of love. Like that's just a gift. It's beautiful.
And also their dreams for themselves, like investing in their dreams for themselves and wanting them to get what they want, you know, out of life. And so without it having to be me that gives it to them. It's interesting, our presenter yesterday, she didn't mention this when she did her presentation, but she's doing her dissertation on compersion. Do you know what that, you know, compersion?
I do, yeah.
Yeah, she's doing her dissertation on compersion, which is something that many people don't even know exists or deny could possibly exist. But compersion is the feeling that you of happiness that you get when someone you love is being loved by someone else other than you. So like instead of feeling jealousy, you feel true happiness for that person having a romantic or sexual often experience with someone else, which is like totally antithetical to a lot of different ideas of what love is, which has to do with, you know, kind of ownership and commitment and, you know, one-on-one only. So, I
Yeah,
mean, I don't know. That's what I think it's interesting.
yeah, absolutely. And I think that's really why it's important to define love for ourselves. Because how many of us will only view love as more like ownership centered, but never
What?
actually
Again, Ahmad, I couldn't.
like how many of us would define love as ownership centric, right? Or with just a single person, one specific way, in one specific time, right? But how many of us would actually include that in the definition? But that's a value that we're bringing into that definition, right? And so we want to kind of, hopefully within this session, like be able to take that step back to really think about some of those things, right? We want all of the amazing things, but also like, what are the stipulations around our life, right?
You have to move closer again, Ahmad. You're
Yeah.
sorry.
The last thing I was saying is like really thinking of both the amazing things that are within the realm of love, and also at the same time for us as individuals. And this has nothing to do with actual love, right? With the definition itself, but what are the stipulations that we ourselves have put into the realm of right? I know, far too many individuals, right, where because love is conditional on specific actions, that a single thing happening means a withdrawal of that love, right? And all of a sudden, I can't love you because you're doing
I
um,
can't love you because what?
because you're doing X action, whatever that looks like for different
Oh,
individuals, right? And
well,
we
you
see,
broke my trust. I mean, this is the thing is people say you broke my trust because you did this thing that I didn't want you to do, or that you promised me you wouldn't do, right? And
yeah,
therefore I can't love you.
yeah, absolutely. So let's go to the next slide. And I want to share with you all a fairly long paragraph. And this paragraph is from the book called All About Love by Bell Hooks. So if you're looking for any kind of reading material around this topic, that is the number one book I will always recommend for like healing, for any kind of well-being, for any kind of transformation. All About Love by Bell Hooks. It was absolutely transformational for me. And so Bell Hooks says in the book, and I'll read this fairly quickly to all of you. Um, and it's an entire book just about love, which is incredible. So Bell Hooks says the word love is most often defined as a noun. Yet all the more astute theorists of love acknowledge that we would all love better if we used it as a verb, which is really critical for our own definitions if you want to think about that piece. And so she goes on saying, I spent years searching for a meaningful definition of the word love. And was
You're garbled again. You have to come forward or something. It's
yeah,
garbled.
I'm not sure what's happening.
It's good now, but
Better now?
it
All
becomes
right.
very garbled.
I'll like lean in. Hopefully this
Yeah,
fixes it.
lean in, lean into love.
Yeah, this is a lesson for all of us.
Yes.
So Bell Hooks says, I spent years searching for a meaningful definition of the word love and was deeply relieved when I found one in psychiatrist Scott Peck's classic self-help book, The Road Less Traveled, first published in 1978. Echoing the work of Eric Fromm, don't know how to pronounce that name, he defines love as the will to extend oneself for the purpose of nurturing one's own or another's spiritual growth. So explaining further, he continues, love is as love does. Love is an act of will, namely both an intention and an action. Will also implies choice. We do not have to love. We choose to love. So since the choice must be made to nurture growth, this definition counters the more widely accepted assumption that we love instinctually. So if we go to the next slide, just to kind of summarize all of those words, so the definition that I go with based on all of that is that love is just an investment in one's own or another's spiritual growth. And when I say spiritual growth, it's the same way with Scott Peck's work, with Bell Hooks's work. Spiritual here isn't religion. Spiritual is kind of that space where your mind, body, and spirit are all connected, right? Where they're all able to thrive. And so for me, it's really critical for a couple of things within this definition, right? The spiritual growth is really incredibly important because if love isn't leading us towards that, right? If it's not inspiring us to move forward or potentially doing the opposite, to me, that's not love anymore, for my own definition. And that investment piece is so critical because with investing, right, it's always an intentional action. Again, there's that sense of movement within it. There's that sense of you matter, right? I am going to love you. I choose to love you because you matter. And that by itself, to me, is huge, right? In a world that has told me for so many of my identities that I'm disposable, right? That I don't matter, right? Being a trans individual, right? Being queer, being Muslim, being a refugee, all of those different things, right? The world constantly told me I don't matter because of those identities. And so to me, love is just such a powerful tool, right? Where anybody who's loving me, whatever those actions look like, whatever that investment looks like, that's leading to my spiritual growth, that tells me that I matter, right? That solidifies that space that I have within myself of who I am as an individual. And that's not saying that like my sense of identity is built off of others loving me, right? It's just saying that because of that love, even for myself, right? The love that I've extended and invested in myself, in my own spiritual growth, right? That's what's been the most affirming. That's the most powerful thing. And like I mentioned early on, this conversation is so important for me because of the power that literally just this one book has had on my life. And if y'all are okay with me sharing just a little bit of my story in relation to this, um, just for a few minutes, and feel free to jump in with any questions or thoughts in the comments as well. But when I found this book, and I actually found it through another friend, so a friend basically calls me up one day and was basically like, "You need to read this book. Drop everything and just read this book." I was like, "I don't know what's going on." And this was a friend who had similar experiences to me in being a survivor of childhood sexual assault. And she was like, "You need to read this book to heal, right? Just from those experiences, from everything." And you didn't have to say all of those words, but I immediately got it. And so, you know what? Immediately picked up the book and started reading. And so, for me growing up, right, having that experience from the age of 4 to 6, right, and having that being a central piece of my identity, right, because as a child, I didn't know the difference between love versus really violent things,
You didn't know
right?
the difference between love and what?
Between love and things that are the exact opposite of love, right? That are forms of violence.
Wow.
For me at the time, and I was 22 at the time, I believe. Um, and so only a few years ago, really. So I was 22 at the time. And despite all the work that I had done, deep down, a part of me on a development level, on a foundational level, still saw the sexual assault as an act of love because that's what I was taught, right? As a 4-year old, you're taught here are the people that love you, here are the people you have to love. And this was a person that I was told that they love me, right? And that I have to love them back. But the way they supposedly loved me, right, was in a really violent way that should never happen to anyone, children or adults, just nobody. but as a child, right, I didn't know all of that. Right. To me, all of it became one and the same, right? The forms of violence, the beautiful things, all of it was love. Right. And so I got to a point where I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know how to love myself because I would reenact forms of violence that were enacted upon me from people that loved me, right? Because that was all I knew. That was love. And it wasn't until I really read this book that it allowed me to really take that step back and be like, oh, wait, hold up. Specifically because of the way that Bell Hooks and Scott Peck define it and explain it, is that if you think about it, within this definition, there is no room for abuse. There is no room for violence. Violence will never lead to spiritual growth. It may lead us on our journeys as amazing individuals who have amazing strengths to utilize really awful experiences and make it into something so much greater, but it's not because of the violence that we're growing, right? That spiritual growth has nothing to do with the violence itself. And so just having this definition, right? And obviously the rest of the book is also just incredible, but having this definition and taking it into my day-to-day life, one, it allowed me to redefine self-love for myself. When I do things every day, when I say that this is self-love, I'm constantly thinking of, all right, what kind of investment is this? How is this leading to spiritual growth? Right? Where is this taking me? And I'm able to do that now, 6 years later, in a way that's kind of instantaneous, right? So I don't spend too much time thinking about it all the time, but it always has those components. And also at the same time, it's allowed me to look at all of the relationships I had in my life, right? With my family, with my friends, with acquaintances, with strangers, right? And really thinking of how do I live and love a love-filled existence, right? Of meeting literally just a random person on the street for a single interaction. How do I make that an investment in that person's spiritual growth? How do I make it an investment in my own spiritual growth? How do I honor my family in a way that's going to move us forward, right? And leads to that investment in spiritual growth. And the really cool thing with this is that I remember I picked up this book and it was September 2014, 2015, one of those. It was September. I remember that much. 2 weeks later, I went back and visited my family in Jordan. And up until that point, we had a fairly, it was a good but not wonderful relationship. There was a lot of pain between us. There was a lot of things that were never really brought forward, that were never acknowledged, that there was no accountability for. And we got along, but there wasn't a lot of the things that I would view as like love between all of us, right? We still tolerated each other, we hung out together, right? But it felt as an obligation versus from a place of we want these relationships. And the really amazing things is, so I went and visited 2 weeks later. I had started implementing a lot of these different things, and my family automatically noticed. They were like, all right, something is different. And it's amazing how just a single person beginning to transform can inspire so many others to begin their own transformations. And so that was the fall where we finally started having conversations about accountability, about things that weren't perfect within our household, right, within our family. And now 6 years later, like I talk to my mom in particular, and probably at least like one or two of my sisters every single day, right? Like, and we actually like hanging out together, right? Like we'll go out of our way to actually see each other, to really invest in each other's spiritual growth, right? But just that one book, just those few actions led to an entire family completely transforming. Right? And that doesn't mean that we're in a place where we're all perfect and everything else, but we're in a place that we literally have never been in before. Right? Even like growing up and things like that, my family was very survival oriented, right? Having gone through multiple wars, right? Displacement, all of these different things. And this was kind of our opportunity to go, into that thriving place, right? Of really honoring, right? Well, what do we each need in terms of that investment? What does spiritual growth actually look like for each of us? And who gets to determine that? And so really thinking of it from an objective standpoint, or like, for example, there was a lot of damage between me and my mom, or me and like a couple of my sisters. And so really thinking of that as an act of love for individuals I want to be in loving relationships with, right? How do I also take that step back and give them the grace they need, right? To really honor their side of everything so that we're able to move forward. And it stopped being about, I'm right, you're wrong, right? I'm always going to prove you wrong kind of thing. And I'm always going to bring up everything all over again. But because we were able to bring in that accountability, to have those conversations, to have those investments, we've all been able to move forward. And so, like I said in the very beginning, like this book was absolutely transformational for me because of the impact it's had on everything I've done since then. Even in terms of starting my own nonprofit, that to me was an act of love. That was a gift back to the community, right? Every program I've ever done has been with this definition in mind. Every program I've been in, right? Every space I go to, I am constantly thinking of that, right? Of how do I be an investment for other people's spiritual growth and at the same time my own spiritual growth? Because I grew up in a culture where love can be harmful to you as long as it's good for somebody else,
Say it
right?
again.
So love can be harmful to me as the person giving love as long as it's good for somebody else, right? So I can go and make an investment that's going to harm me as long as it's not harming someone else. That's love, right? I was taught that love is sacrifice, right? Love is being a martyr, right, in your relationships. And this definition changed that completely for me because it's, if I am loving you in a way that's also harming me, that's not love. Because for me, that builds resentment over time. And within like months, years, whatever it is, I will start hating you, right? Because like I am giving you all this love and I am being harmed by it. And so this definition allows me personally to go beyond that, right? Of how do we make sure that it's good for me and for you, which goes into like boundaries, right? How do I set boundaries with people? How do I honor myself and also honor that I am a loving person and I want to love people, even if they are harmful to me, but I'm going to set boundaries. We can still have a loving relationship, but they're not going to have access to certain pieces of me that they've taken advantage of before until we get to a place, right, where that healing has happened and that accountability has happened.
So what you're
So,
talking about right now, Ahmad, I feel is really important because it speaks to how not to spiritually bypass. And what I mean by that is sometimes I could see somebody who's saying, you know, love is an investment in one's own or another spiritual growth, and saying sacrifice is a spiritual virtue. So even if it's painful for you, even if it's difficult for you, it's good for you because you're if you're growing spiritually by sacrificing. And what you're saying now is you also need to pay attention to how you feel as a complete human being in the moment, not just your spiritual growth down the line, but like how you feel, how your mind, body, spirit feels in that relationship with what's happening, and to honor that, and that that's your pathway to spiritual growth. You see what I'm saying about
mhm.
spiritual bypass? Because
Yeah,
people often do that.
absolutely.
They like put up with a lot of stuff that's not okay because they're trying to be transcend their humanity and be spiritual, you know?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think a really key thing for me with all of that is really the intentionality behind all of it. And so, because at the same time, so like, you know, with me sharing that about my family, right, there are still a couple of like extended family members, for example, right, that I don't have that kind of loving relationship with, right, but I'll still show up to spaces, right, to if it means something like to my mom, for example, right? And so it's an act of love to my mom that could potentially harm me, right? Because I don't have the best relationship with these individuals. But going into it with intentionality versus lack of intentionality are two very different things. And so when I go into those spaces now, like let's say I have to go to a wedding, right? And I know this is going to be a lot for me. There are so many things I'm doing for my self love, right? And also asking for love from those same family members, right? Of I need different investments, right? For this to be an okay experience. For me to still be able to walk away with it from this, as bad as it is, but with all this other love, I'm able to move past it and potentially even get positive things out of this,
Mhm.
right? Whereas not having that intentionality, because I definitely used to be like that person of I was like nothing harms me, right? Everything I'm beyond this. I am closed off to everything, right? I've shut down my emotions. Everything is good. It's you can hurt me, but it's about you. It's not about me. And what I found over time, like that literally led to my PTSD being re-triggered at one point because I was making it about somebody else for so long without ever really looking at, all right, like how is this behavior actually impacting me? Like, what do I need? And if I choose to be in that situation, then cool. But also, what I normally tell people is, well, what else can you do so that this doesn't destroy you? Right? If you're saying that I have to be in this space in this time, okay, cool. I'm not going to take that away from you. But what else would you want to do separately? And I think oftentimes we don't have that second conversation of what else can we do for ourselves that goes beyond this one interaction or this
So
one.
So what that makes me think of is also, and I'm going to use a concrete, practical example, which isn't exactly what you're talking about because you're talking about emotional safety, but I'm just going to bring it to the physical safety place. Okay. So I have friends with who are very, health compromised, and they're invited to a wedding, and it's in a time of COVID, right? And it's their niece who they love very much and they want to go. So they're going to go, but they don't want to get COVID, right? So the question is, once you're there, what do you do to protect yourself? What safeguards do you have? And and what they ended up doing is the wedding was, outside, and they just practiced their social distancing and they hung back, so that they were there, but they weren't like right up all in it with other people in a way that was. So I think it's an example, like a concrete example of physical boundaries that also applies to emotional boundaries. Like you go, but that doesn't mean you have to talk to the people that are going to trigger you, or that doesn't mean you have to, you can make sure that you are protected while you're there, but
Yeah,
only if you really know and understand and value your own needs and your
exactly.
own feelings in the situation, right?
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely.
I was
And
going to
it's
ask you a question also, which is this whole definition of love as an investment in one's own or another spiritual growth. I had two questions about it. One was, what happens if the person that you're trying to love in your family or whatever doesn't care about their spiritual growth? It's not a concept that they resonate with.
and that's okay.
You can still want
Right?
to be in it for their spiritual growth.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the key thing with spiritual growth, I think the danger with spiritual growth is that sometimes we can get to a place where we'll define it for somebody else. And so I know like I've fallen into that trap with my younger sisters where I'm like, spiritual growth equals this for you, right? Like this is where you need to go, right? And so like I'm investing in you to get there. And like time and again, right, I get proven like completely wrong, right? Because people are able to come up with their own possibilities that none of us can ever really dream of because they're, as the people walking through this journey, right? They're the ones, just like for ourselves, right? We're the only ones that are experts on our own growth, right? And where we head to and our limitless possibilities. Um, though with the possibility of individuals not seeing the not being hopeful, I guess, of being in a place where growth is even possible, right? Or there is like any movement forward or anything beyond where they are in that moment. And I think for that, an act of love and an act of investment is holding hope,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It's
That's
holding
what
hope.
that's
Yeah.
what I
And
think early about somebody's potential and who they want to be and how they want to feel, and knowing that that's possible for them, even when they lose faith that it is, you know?
yeah. And just that act is so powerful, right? Of knowing that, especially when people know that we're holding that hope for them, right? Of and communicating that, right? Of like, I am holding hope that you will get to wherever you need to go. I don't know what that looks like, right? It's beautiful, whatever it is, but like, you got this, right? Like, I hold that hope so closely, especially on bad days, right? Remembering that somebody is holding that hope for us is so powerful, right? It's that by itself is enough to continue moving us forward in our journeys until we're able to reclaim that hope, right? And hold it for ourselves. Yeah, that's beautiful.
I also just want to I mean, just don't want to gloss over something you said earlier, which somebody wrote in the chat, hurt people, and love is the ability to recognize, Jessica said, love is the ability to recognize that hurt people may hurt people, but remembering that you're required to love yourself and have boundaries for yourself and protect your light. I feel like that's absolutely, I resonate with that. At the same time, as I think what you were saying is, if you grow up being told this is what love feels like, this is what love is, and it's not this boundaries and protecting your light or whatever, it doesn't do that. It's very confusing. And I want to say that because I think you're so brave for putting it out there as your experience. I feel like there's a lot of people that have that experience where love is very confusing because there's this ideal of what it's supposed to be, but they've never really experienced that. So it's like trying to win $1 million or something. It's like it's just, and so you're putting up. I used to say love is chemotherapy. Like I used to feel like love was chemotherapy, and what I meant was by that was like you had to go through hell to be able to get anything decent from it. Like it's like Woody Allen movies and where he says what you need the eggs kind of thing. I don't know, but I resonate with that because I think like people's experience of love as a child impacts how they can love themselves. Like you can't love anybody unless you love yourself, or you can't love anyone. I think what that comes down to is you're going to love people the way you love yourself, because that's what you know as love. So it's a journey to get beyond that. And I feel like we shouldn't just glide over it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that journey is very, very real. And it's going to be different for everyone, right? For some, it's going to be so much easier than others. For for me, it literally was a couple of weeks, right? Like that intentionality with the resources that I needed, right? With like people around me who are willing to also be vulnerable with me, like everything just lined up, and it was beautiful and it was fantastic. And then, even within my own journey, right? I have other relationships where it's like 6 years later and we're still at like square one or 1.5, right? Like, and so it's very different. I do want us to just like pause for a second, I guess, also because I definitely also agree with like the hurt people in various ways, right? And that love can be really
You're
difficult.
garbled again.
Right.
Sorry.
I'm getting closer. This is great. Um, this just allows you all to see my face really close. Y'all are welcome. This is great. Um, and so I was just saying that, for things like hurt people, right? There's definitely truth to it, but there's also a lot of danger within that, right? Violent and really toxic behavior, they're, they're actions that we choose to take, right?
What?
They are actions that we choose to partake in, right? They're actions that we bring to the table, right? Um, and just because we've gone through a specific form of violence doesn't mean we'll enact that form of violence what it does mean though, in terms of this conversation, right? So for me personally, right, that sexual assault impacted how I loved myself, right? It didn't necessarily impact how I loved other people in terms of me being toxic to everyone else and things like that. It didn't really impact too much there. It was really just for myself, which meant I had no boundaries because I didn't honor myself, right? I was in constant negative self talk because that was all I knew for myself, right? I had taken all of that violence that was showed to me and just enacted it upon myself over and over and over again, right? And so what ends up happening is we hurt people in different ways, or we hurt ourselves in a lot of different ways. But at the same time, I do want to challenge everyone after this to really take a step back and think about if we lived in a world where everyone was loving, right? And that's not saying that there are no challenges. Challenges are beautiful, right? Conflict is beautiful, like as long as we're moving forward with it and everything. All of that can be part of love, right? It can be part of everything we're talking about. But thinking of in a world, right, where we know how to love one another and we know how to love ourselves, right? Where in our school systems, right, in our households, in our workspaces, all of it, right? Like Kathy, I love that you all defined love for Be Strong Families, right? Like thinking of if every single workspace did that, right? Really thinking of where would we be? Because oftentimes what ends up happening is we look at violence as the reason we get to beautiful places,
The
right?
guilt of violence is the reason what?
As the reason we get to beautiful places, right?
Oh,
As
yeah, yeah,
violence, as
no.
the reason for growth, right? As the reason for our strengths is because we've gone through violence.
Right, no. Oh, we also tend to, Ahmad, think it's always the other person that's toxic, or the other person's that's a hurt person, or the other person that's, and we are loving. We love other people. We are loving. And I feel like there's a great Maya Angelou little video clip on YouTube that says, I am human. And that means nothing that's human is foreign to me.
Yeah.
Everything, I have all the potential for great evil and for great goodness. And I can choose to use my energies for the positive. But it's, if we're real with ourselves, we have to love ourselves through being jerks. We're all jerks, sometimes.
Yeah.
Because we're all human.
Absolutely. And that's where accountability just comes in. And then it's wonderful. It's just this constant cycle.
You don't have to be perfect to be loved, and you don't have to, you just, right? Like you don't have to be always good, or it has to be always positive in order to be worthy of love, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so if we can go to the next slide, because I recognize that we only have a few more minutes. But I feel like we already kind of covered a lot of this in terms of everything that you all brought forward. We're going to go to the next slide after that. So just wanted to really highlight this, and I already mentioned this, right? In terms of the definition that Bell Hooks has, right? In terms of that spiritual growth, there can't be forms of abuse and violence within that, right? Abuse is never an investment in spiritual growth, right? I can't say that more times, right? But oftentimes what happens, especially with the prevalence of domestic violence, intimate partner violence, childhood violence, right? We're taught that the people who have abused us love us. This isn't saying that they don't care. This isn't saying that they don't have investment in emotions within us, that we can use a bunch of other words, but it's not love, right? And I will usually like go and fight people about that, right? Of like, for me, within my definition, I cannot have any semblance of abuse within it. If I am okay with a form of toxicity, a form of abuse for a short period of time, or in a specific relationship, that's one thing, right? But calling it love is another, right? And so for me, I can't do that. And so really thinking of that, of what would you call relationships where the person who has caused this violence towards you actually does, and you, let's say you believe this, and in reality actually does care about you, right? What would that look like? And how do we make sure that if we're building loving relationships, that we move away from singular values, right? Because if to me caring is love, then there is forms of violence that can exist there. And so how do we build that for ourselves?
Yeah, I feel like this is a really big conversation and that we don't have time for the whole conversation. But I do want to say that Be Strong Families works with a lot of child welfare involved birth parents.
Hmm.
And I wouldn't be willing to say that because they have hurt their children, abused or neglected their children, that means that they don't love them. I would be willing to say that in the moments when the abuse and neglect occurred, those were not acts of love, and
Hmm.
that love could have, if love had been present in those moments, it wouldn't have happened. But I'm not willing to negate them as being, as having love or being loving people. And
Yeah.
I am willing to say, I mean, for me, I also, again, it's like what I was saying before, is that I don't think people are honest with themselves
Hmm.
if they always think it's the other person that's the abusive one, the other person that's the toxic one, the other person, if you've never humiliated someone, never embarrassed someone. I mean, have you ever yelled at your kid in public? You know, like a lot of people have, but that doesn't count, as humiliation. But it is. But I'm just training them. So anyway, I think it's like I think it's very complicated, you know?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And just to be clear, right? Like if we're looking at love as an investment, as a verb, right? Then love is not a organic, like natural state of being, right? It's the actions. And so absolutely, I think we're all loving people. I truly believe that humans in general are loving. We just don't know how to love. We don't know the action piece of it. And I know that in a couple of weeks when we meet again, right, we'll go into a little bit more of that conversation to really like tease it out a little bit more.
I'm
Give it,
so looking forward to the next part of the conversation. And you're going to be back in 2 weeks, yeah?
yes,
Yes.
really excited. And so
Yeah,
we'll
or
end
it's
here.
saying, yeah, like a lot of times we hurt others because we're hurt or unwell. I serve a lot of DCFS involved families, and they made mistakes with the care of their children. However, those mistakes and hurts were frequently because of drug use or being mentally or emotionally unwell themselves. So I just think it's very I hear what you're saying and where you're going and why you're drawing a hard line. And I can go with you somewhat, but it's a big I like though there's no love without justice too. I think justice as a way of thinking about is this love, is important. So much, so grateful for you, Ahmad. Thank you for being here. Thank you for teaching us. Thank you for sharing your experience so vulnerably. And this is next time as the healing. Are we gonna do? I can't hear you.
Yeah, we'll go into those next time.
Okay, good, awesome. And I will just close it out by saying, come back tomorrow. Um, we have one tomorrow. It's not on here, but tomorrow we're going to be talking about gratitude and Thanksgiving. Pre-Thanksgiving, we're going to be talking about what we're grateful for this year. Just a conversation. Hope that you will join us. What's the next one, Dee? Come on. Wear a mask. Wear a mask, and buy one from us if you want to. If you want to, because this way you could be wearing a mask that asks people to amplify health, amplify love, amplify respect, amplify justice, and that would be a better world, right? Next one, show your love. We want to know what you love about what we do. We want to be able to continue providing the webinars. If you can donate, do donate. If you can't, that's fine. We love you anyway. Next one, or we love you regardless. I don't know, but I'm not using the right words. And if you have a webinar that you'd like to share, please contact me. And with that, we're out. Thank you so much, Ahmad. It was wonderful as usual. I love your perspective and your vulnerability and your depth. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for being here with us. And y'all are just amazing.
Happy Thanksgiving. Although in Ireland, they probably don't celebrate Thanksgiving. It's our holiday this, couple days. Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. I will stay for one more moment to close out the poll.
Thank you, Dee.